Okay, so just kind of follow up where we were at and where we are. So week 3, and I realize this is the first 8-week syllabus, but I'm just going to kind of look at the week 3. So week 3 coming up, just so we're all on the same page, will be the informal assessment report coming up. And I know just in conversation before we started, a few of you mentioned, hey, I've already got those knocked out. I'm already starting on some of the other ones, just try to stay ahead. So hopefully you're in a good place with the informals that you selected, able to administer those. Has anybody ran into any challenges or roadblocks that you need help with? Darius?
I just have to pick a different kid because the kid that I intended to do and got permission from the parent was sick and has been sick. So he hasn't been here. So I
Okay.
had to start from
Yeah.
scratch.
Just having to start from scratch on that. So
Yeah.
is that going to delay you a little bit, or you feel like you'll be all right?
I'm going to try to get it all done tomorrow, but it's
If
another
not,
day.
due to the circumstance, let me know. If you run close on time, if we need to work with your assignment on that, give you a little extra time due to this circumstance. So everyone else feel pretty good and comfortable so far working with the informals?
I did have one question.
Okay.
On one of my informals, I chose to do a rubric grading of a verbal retell. Do
Yeah.
I need to include a recording of the verbal retell? Or is just the rubric good enough?
Just the rubric on this. Yeah, the only thing really for this semester as far as submitting anything that has audio and all that will be when you do your mock IEP, your video and all that. So just submit the rubric on that and I can review it. It'll be a piece of documentation to show what was done on that. So you'll be all right. You don't need to submit the audio. Okay, does that answer your question? Yeah, okay. Anyone else have any questions on the informal? I know we went over the informals pretty in depth last week, touched on those. So anything on that? Any others? Okay, real quick, while we're talking about, as you're going to start putting your report together again, I'll remind you, I had listed the example in there. Does anybody have any challenges, difficulties, questions you want to ask about how to display any of your data? You won't have like multiple data points to compare. Basically what you're doing is you're administering 3 individual informals and just kind of getting a baseline for each assessment, and you're just displaying that. As we move forward, you'll have multiple pieces of data to display in those charts and graphs, but this is just a very basic display, whether you do it in a table, a chart, or graph. Okay, so a lot of times if students in previous semesters have not had a lot of experience doing that, they tend to overthink it a little bit and they create a lot of undue stress on them, so on themselves trying to figure that out. So this first was just very basic representation of the data that you've collected from the informals. Okay, does everyone feel pretty good about how to incorporate that information into a visual representation?
So I could even do, I'm just going to run this by you and make sure I'm thinking about this correctly.
Okay.
I could do like one chart in percentages maybe,
Mhm.
and say this one was the reading test, this one was letter names,
That's
this
right.
one was math, and
Yeah,
do
just make sure you distinct
60% and
Yeah.
30 or
exactly.
whatever.
You can have your percentages. I'm thinking of I'm just going to use a PowerPoint chart, graph, whatever you want to call it. Left-hand column, you can list all your percentages, and then on your data bars or your bar that you'll plug in on the percentages, just make sure you label it, whether it was reading comprehension. I'm just throwing things out there, but just make sure you label each one. But you can put all 3 of them in that one visual representation for this assignment, because it's all just very basic. Moving forward, you'll probably want to have and you will have, especially on like the CBM, you'll want to have multiple tables or charts, because we're looking at multiple data points. Okay, so yeah, this one can be very condensed. Okay, the main thing is just don't overthink it and cause a lot of extra stress and worry about that. Okay, any other questions while we're talking about informal, kind of what's expected, what we're looking for? I'm just going to scroll down again really quick to make sure everyone understands kind of how that assignment's broken down. See if you guys have any specific.
Did we have an example of the
Yes, I believe the examples posted in Blackboard under 805 resources, along with there was an interview group example. And basically, Darius, the interview, or I'm sorry, the informal I put on there, that same format's used for each one of these reports. Okay. And so it'll pretty much be laid out the same, with the exception of CBM. There's a couple extra sections, and I will go over that with you at that point in time. Okay. So mainly you're looking at your introduction section. So you just want to make sure that you cover all the information there. It's just giving a brief background of the, oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the interview. I looked at that interviewee. We don't want to talk about that. You guys already handed those in. Okay, so identifying information. So you just want to make sure that you're clear and explicit and explain. Talk about the name of the informal assessments that you chose. Just give a description of it, okay? And make sure you list all three. What date or dates did you use to administer them? Also, just a brief description of what it's measuring, what you're trying to measure, and determine if, you know, what the student knows. What was the purpose of it? What was the purpose of doing these? Basically, you're just trying to get some baseline data, some skilled areas, whether it be reading, math, spelling, whatever it may be, writing, to determine if further testing needs to be done to identify weaknesses. And so the purpose and reason kind of are intertwined there together. That's your identifying information, your opening section. Then we're going to talk about the background. Again, I mentioned early on in one of our meetings that do not use the student's real name, create a pseudonym, or you can just use their initials. Make sure you talk about or let us know how old they are. And then if they already have an identified disability in the school level, okay? Yours may not have an identified disability yet, maybe suspecting that. So you just make that clear. Suspecting that this child has a disability in reading comprehension, or if they've already been identified, you would put has already been categorized as specific. I'm getting tongue tied. Specific learning disability is their category, whatever it may be. Just list that on there. A little bit about their background, about their academic background, maybe previous performance. Have they struggled previously? And that's kind of what prompted you to do the testing. Yeah.
I do have a question about that with my child, because I need to make sure I don't need to go pick a new kid.
Okay.
I work in a mixed abilities classroom, so I do self-contained.
Yeah.
So the students I have access to are much lower cognitively, but I do have one in my class who is looking at moving out. I chose him because he actually functions more like a specifically learning disabled student, but he is listed as a mild to moderate intellectual disability.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be still okay?
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Yeah. You can use them even if they have been identified or if they have not. Either way, it doesn't make a difference. It's just on how you're going to present it in providing this information on background. Okay. Also, if they've had any behavioral issues that you're taking into account based on information you've observed or you've gotten from their regular classroom teacher. And then anything from teacher observation that the teacher can give you a little insight or anything that you've observed. A little bit about their family background. Are they coming from a single parent home? Are they a foster child? Are they being raised by grandparents? Just a little tidbit of information about their family background, and then any other background information that you feel is relevant. So when we do this is all information that we would put into a comprehensive report too. And so those of you that end up using the testing lab video that I talked about, and I'll provide you the comprehensive report, the first couple pages give a lot of this information, except it's very detailed. Okay, it's not just a quick snapshot. There's a lot of in-depth information that's provided. Okay. So after we do that, we'll move down to the test results and interpretation section. And this is where the tables, the charts, the graphs come into play. And again, I mentioned this last week. I'm going to point it out to you again tonight. This section is where most of your points come from for the entire assignment, you'll see this section is 55 points out of like 125. Okay, and a lot of it goes into showing that you analyze the results and you have the data to support it. You're then presenting it in those visual representations, whether it's the table, chart, graph, and that you've labeled them. I think Kylie, I think you mentioned that. Can I show it all in one graph? And my answer was yes. Just make sure for each bar that goes up to that percentage that you label that and label what that assessment was, so we can differentiate between the two. So make sure that you label those accurately. You're presenting them, and then you're going to highlight that student's strengths and also their weaknesses that you found just from doing the informal, the quick snapshot view, something that stood out to you as far as what you felt like was a strength, something that you felt like was a weakness. Okay. If you're focusing on some behavioral issues, then it'll be more behavioral strengths and behavioral weaknesses. If it's more academic related, reading, math, then some of the different skills that you gave them an informal assessment on, you would identify those. So that's pretty much what that section is, just being able to explain the data you collected and convey that in visual representation and identifying the strengths and weaknesses. As we move forward, it'll be really interesting to go back and compare the informal, the normed reference, and then the CBM to see how consistent they are all the way through based on the skill sets that you're testing. Then we're going to roll right into the recommendation and conclusion. So you're basically just going to highlight some instructional planning, some recommendations that you would make just off of doing the informal, just off some of the strengths and weaknesses you've identified. What would be some recommendations that you would make? And these could be instructional methods. It could be going in and modifying some of the work. Modification could be instead of doing 20 problems, we want Johnny Joe to do evens only or odds only. You know, it could be something like that. Any type of grade level change, do you need to perhaps drop it down? If you did informals on 4th grade level, Darius works with 4th grade level, he may find that they're extremely low. He may need to drop that student down to a 2nd grade level. Okay, so that's some of the things that they're looking for. And then basically just provide a brief summary of their overall performance through your observation when they did the informals. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up as far as the content for this report. It's a little bit shorter compared to the other two that you'll do, but that's the basic information we're looking at. And then the things, this comes from me on my side, looking at the organization of it, mechanics. Are your ideas presented in a clear, coherent, cohesive manner? Making sure your paper's laid out in an APA format, spelling, grammar, and then also making sure that you attach that permission form. Even moving forward, if you use the same student, all of them, each time you administer or turn in one of these reports, make sure you attach that permission form on that. Okay. Any questions as you guys start putting that together based on the rubric I went over with you to kind of show you kind of what's expected on that? Darius, that pretty straightforward, pretty clear. Okay. All right, if there's not any questions on that, I'll kind of move over quickly, kind of go over with you. Looking at week 3, I pulled up there was a PowerPoint in there, and it's kind of a combination. So I skipped through to where it really kind of goes back over informal. We'll come back and revisit this same slideshow in a few weeks because it talks about CBM. But I kind of wanted to jump down to where it talked about some of the informal methods of assessment, and it gave some different examples on here. I feel like probably based on your feedback, you guys are in good shape, have everything nailed down, but I want to go ahead and just touch base on Some additional ideas are error analysis, task analysis, criterion related assessment, checklist, questionnaires, student samples, interviews. Those could all be considered a form of informal assessment. When you look at reading, you could have individuals on decoding, doing an informal assessment on decoding skills, fluency, and comprehension. So if someone was interested in reading, you could do an informal over each one of those specific categories. Initial informal inventories, assessment.
Dr. Posey,
Yeah.
are you wanting us to see the slide you show?
Yeah, is it not showing it to you?
No, we still see the rubric.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought it was showing the
Okay.
share. I apologize. Let me exit out of that and go back. Thank you for saying that. For stopping me. You guys were probably sitting there thinking, what in the world? Can you see it now? Okay. So just some guidelines, determining which one you were to select, whether it's inventories. Make sure that they're well organized inventories, that they provide relevant data. If it's a passage form, make sure that it's organized. If you're wanting the student to go through and identify mistakes or do an oral reading and you record that and identify different mistakes, mispronunciations, whatever it may be. Comprehension scores, if you're doing reading and those are erratic from one level to the next, you might need to go back and look at those particular passages. That could be an issue if you're just seeing scores all over the place and that aren't really consistent. And also remember too that when you start these, and I think I mentioned this with Darius and used him as an example, you're kind of making an estimate when you first start the informal just to kind of get a baseline. And so after your first informal, it may confirm whether you're above that individual student's level or below, and you can adjust accordingly. I said Darius may, for his, he may discover that he needed to drop back to a second grade level. So at first, when you do these, it is somewhat of an estimation on where to start as far as appropriate grade level. Other informal assessments, if you were interested in spelling or stumped and looking for some informals in spelling would be simply the old-fashioned spelling test. It could be a shortened 5-word test, a quick snippet just to see. You could have them say the word, use it in a sentence. You can go back and analyze errors, visualization, phonetic errors, linguistic performance to make sure they understand how to pronounce the word. And then one of the last slides I just wanted to show you is perhaps looking at performance assessments, whether the student has to create some type of response based on his or her knowledge or construct response, whether they demonstrate their knowledge of something by demonstrating that for you to make sure you understand that they totally understood the concept. Maybe have them provide a detailed explanation. Authentic assessment is basically just applying knowledge in a manner which is consistent with the real world setting and being able to apply it. You can do that real easy with math, basic math. Understand.
Quick question.
Yeah, go ahead, Darius.
For the assessment, say I wanted to do phonics, but
Yes.
I want different areas of phonics. So could I do one assessment? I'm looking for the long and short vowel sounds, and another one, I'm looking for consonant blends.
That's
So
right.
could I
You
do
sure can.
all three on phonics, just with different phonics skills?
Yes, that's correct, which is
Okay.
very similar to what Kylie was referring to a while ago with hers as well. So yeah, you definitely can. Exactly. So any other question on informals? I know most of you probably are comfortable with the ones you have and you're done, ready to move on, write your report, but I just kind of wanted to go over that part of the PowerPoint quickly, and we will come back and revisit the first part of that in a few weeks when we talk about CBMs, because there's a lot of information on there pertaining to that. So any questions on informals? So after you turn this in, you will have, if you look at kind of the schedule moving forward, you'll have a week off as far as where you don't have anything due, but you are expected to start working on, concentrating on that normed reference. I would also advise you, due to having to obtain multiple data points, to go ahead and start thinking about the CBM, because we're asking you to get multiple data points over a period of time. And this kind of goes back to, if you remember the very first night, I talked about once we got started, some of these would start overlapping each other. And so you really might want to think about doing that and just kind of getting ahead a little bit on that, so you won't get yourself in a bind time-wise on getting the data collected that you will need. One thing I do want to ask before we finish up this evening, looking ahead, is anyone going to have a challenge acquiring some type of normed reference test data to where you're going to need some help with that? I know I've gotten a couple emails between the two sections of 805. Is anyone going to have a challenge with that, or do you feel pretty good moving forward with it?
Dr. Posey, the normed reference would be like a Woodcock Johnson or something like that,
That's
right?
exactly right. You are right. Yep. Very common, very popular WJ4 Woodcock Johnson 4th edition.
Now, do we need to give it, or do we just have to have access to the data?
Okay, so as far as administering it, you could not administer it. Now, you could, depending on if you have a full-time psych or psychometrist or school psych, and if they're willing to let you observe them actually administering that, that would be great, because you get to see the process and how that works. If not, if you can acquire the data to have, would really like for you to be able to observe it, if at all possible.
My student that I picked, I actually happened to get to observe him last year when he gave it to him during his 3-year re-eval.
Yep. That works. So you get to see how that process, it's very lengthy, right? Depending on
Yes.
the age group, they break it up. So it may take longer than it would an older student. So yeah, no, so you've already got to experience some of that, but if you can get the data, that would be awesome. That'll help you
I
out.
have the data.
Okay.
So for that one, we could just sit in on like if one of our students is being
To observe.
re-evaled.
Yeah, re-eval, because technically on those normed reference, you have to have the credentialing and the certification to be able to administer those.
Okay.
So if they will agree to let you observe, and then if they will work with you and provide data that you need to complete this assignment,
Okay.
that's great. It's awesome.
How would like parent permission work with that? Could we just like
So
black out the name on like a
yeah,
like a
just
consent
black out
form?
the name, but
Okay.
on that you would need to work with your building
School psych.
administration, your school psych.
Okay.
Make sure they're on board with it to give you permission that, hey, you're in graduate school and I need
Okay.
to observe this. So yeah.
Great.
So with none of my students being up for re-eval this year, but I just get the old data.
You can.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, another thing I want to mention to you, and I talked about this in advance. Some of you guys may be employed in a district where they use map testing, where they use star reading and math. Those are actually considered normed reference tests. So some of your students, depending on how they're used in your district, we used to use star reading and math a lot for benchmarking purposes, and we would administer it multiple times throughout the year to monitor growth. And so if you have a student you're working with and you can obtain that data, that's acceptable. If your district is using map testing, that's normally administered 3 times a year, usually right after school starts at the beginning, then at some point in the middle, either before Christmas holiday break or coming right off of it. And then usually at some point after spring break before school ends, it's administered again. So you could even pull that data as well.
The other new one our district at least is using, Dr. Posey, is FastBridge.
Yes.
FastBridge. And I actually found out, so fun fact, I was actually looking through ours the other day, and for the CBM, our tier monitoring groups are CBM tested. So that one really gives you and it will literally graph the data for you.
Exactly.
It does all of it.
Yeah. That's the beauty of some of the softwares. So just so to clarify, and this may be getting ahead and all that. So we talk about all these charts, graphs, and tables, and compiling all the data. So if you ever decided to pursue that, whether it's school psychometrist, school psychologist, all that, we're working with all these different normed assessments, and there are hundreds of them. They all come with scoring software. Okay, so literally we do the administration, we record, and then we have to take that back. We log in and we enter its data entry into that software, and it creates a lot of that and compiles it for us, which makes it so much more easier. But when you're going through a program and learning how to do that, a lot of the programs would literally make you manually calculate that, so you have a true understanding of how that works. But after you get through the program, learning how to do it and all that, you have software. So that's the beauty of it, Kylie. Fastbridge will do it for you. The Woodcock Johnson does. They have scoring software for it. So even your adaptive behavior skills, depending on what your district uses, we have scoring software for that. We have them complete the protocol, the forms, we gather it back, we go back and we enter all the data, combine it with our reports. So any other questions? Nope, everyone feels good about the informal and putting it together and good to go, right? All right, remember, I put the example on there for you, the format. If you need to reference that, it's there for you to help you out. So if you have questions between now and when it's due on Sunday, please email and I'll get to you in the morning or on the backside in the afternoon, okay? All right, thank you guys. Have a great evening. We'll see you next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.